After he killed the boy, he put him in a bag and carried him with him until the end of his days. Actually, he found the boy at the beach. The waves had washed up the dead boy, and he gathered him and put him on his shoulder and carried him up to the dry sand. But it was no good. The boy was dead. He put the boy in a bag, and he carried the bag on his shoulder. It wasn't heavy, but as he walked on the path up from the beach to the road, the burden got heavier and heavier, and he told himself over and over again that he hadn't killed the boy, that he had found him on the beach, and that he was on his way now to the little town, the little village that was near the ocean, to tell the constable, to tell the police, to tell the shopkeeper, to tell the people at the grocery store that he had found the boy, that he had been on the beach, that he had washed up, that maybe his family were tourists and they were visiting, and they got caught by one of those sneaker waves, and the boy had been lost at sea and was now washed back up on the beach, and the boy was dead, and he hadn't killed him. He had found him on the beach, and now, walking on the road, the man, and he was a young man, not even 30. Well, he was 30, just 30, and he was walking on the road, and he was a gifted, self-taught artist who had had little or no success, and that day he had not eaten well, and he lived in a shack up in the woods, away from the ocean, not where he wanted to live, but all that he could find. And in exchange for a little work around the grounds, he was allowed to stay in that house. And he was walking down the road with his thin, fine hair, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and carrying on his shoulder the body of the dead boy in the bag. He had found the bag at the beach. How fine to find something that you need, that you have to put something else in. He was glad to have found the bag. It was a tidy thing, and the boy fit right inside of it. It was a long bag, kind of like a duffel bag, but longer than that even. And it was heavy enough, and the boy was in there, snug and dead, and it was comforting to have the boy. And as he got closer to the town, when he was walking past the service station, and the cars were whizzing in and out, and he by then was pretty tired, and he was very hungry, he thought of putting his burden down in the weeds, who would notice a big long gray bag, and going into the store and taking out his few dollars and getting something to eat. He was hungry. He was very hungry. He was a little confused. And he thought, if I get too confused, I won't be able to convince anybody that I didn't kill the boy, that I found him on the beach. Of course, if they never find the boy, then there is no problem. The boy crossed the street. The man, after putting his burden down, crossed the street, and he walked through the parking lot of the store, of the grocery store. He liked the people there, and he liked to tease them. He was a gifted artist. He was lonely, and he was not very successful. But he was very comfortable teasing people. They were his family, the people at the store, the people at the restaurant, the tourists he met at the beach, here and there. Those are the people that he talked to. What did he paint? That's what they ask him always. What do you paint if you're a painter? He says, I paint everything. Well, occasionally people did look at his paintings, because at the side of the store, every Sunday, different artists and craftspeople would show their wares. They would show the things that they had made or painted. There was even a singer that would sing sometimes, and he took his paintings there, and people looked at the paintings and they made faces and they whispered to each other. They even asked him sometimes, "What is it?" Well, of course, what was it? What is it? It was something miraculous. It was the miraculous dawn. You know dawn, don't you? You know that time in the morning when the sun is breaking over the trees and you can hear the ocean off in the distance? That is the miraculous. I have painted it, but to them all they saw was a dark canvas with a red blob and streaks of lightning. The sun doesn't make lightning, they tried to explain to him. Anyway, he went into the store and he looked around for something to eat, but he was nervous and fidgety. Why had he carried that boy up from the beach? He should have left him there. But if he had left him there, maybe the waves, the tide, would have caught hold of him and carried him back into the ocean. He was a kind of a funny-looking boy. His skin was green, and his face was all kind of mushy. And his fingers were mushy, and his toes were mushy. What sort of thing was that? And the clothes he was wearing were ragged, and one sleeve was torn off his shirt. And he had the man didn't know. He was trying to think, and he was standing in the way in the store, and someone came up behind him and said, "Excuse me." And the man turned and said, "I didn't do it. I didn't kill the boy." Well, that brought attention after a bit from the people that worked in the store. They knew the man, and he was always confessing to one thing and another. He seemed to have enormous guilt. Something was eating away at him, and when he confessed, they would lead him away. Someone would buy him a hamburger. Someone would buy him a bowl of soup. They would sit him down in the restaurant, and they would comfort him, and they would tell him that he was a great artist, and someday everybody would know, and that he shouldn't feel bad about it. He shouldn't feel so empty and solemn and awful. Yes, they tried to comfort him, and that same day they did comfort him, but this time the boy had the goods. The boy had something. He had done something. He had killed somebody. The man, I should say. The man had killed somebody. And he was going to convince everyone that he was important, that he wasn't just a failed artist that painted things that no one could relate to. His heart and soul went into his paintings. He loved to work. He loved to paint. It meant so much to him. Every brush stroke had a consequence. Every brush stroke was a chance for glory. But somehow he had failed. Somehow he failed over and over. The finest paintings of the world were beyond his reach. He couldn't do it. He could love paintings. He could love art, but somehow he couldn't do it. But he had something. He had something. People would have to notice he was a person of consequence. Over in the bushes there, he told the manager of the store, over in the bushes there, across the street, in the field, by the gas station, is a duffel bag. And in the duffel bag, well, you just look in the duffel bag. Look in the duffel bag, and then you'll see. Then you'll see for sure. Well, he was so agitated this time that, as they had to do on occasion, they called the sheriff, the deputy sheriff of the little town, and after a bit, she came driving up, and she came driving up in her squad car. She got out. She took off her sunglasses and put them in her shirt pocket near her badge. She looked at him with sad eyes. She had conversed with him before when he was in the state, and the first question she had, "Did you take your lithium today?" And that made the man agitated, even more agitated, and sort of angry, and he tried to suppress himself. He realized that he was in the center, and people that were coming into the store and people that were going out of the store had stopped to look, and he was standing not on the sidewalk, but in the parking lot itself. And the woman, the police officer, the deputy sheriff, had confronted him. And the manager was there, and everybody's faces were so kind and so loving and so concerned for him. And he didn't want them to be concerned because he had a boy in a duffel bag. He wanted them to be concerned because he was an artist, a great artist, a massively great artist, an artist whose name and images would live for eternity. He started shaking. "No," he said, "no, I don't need any pharmaceutical drugs," is the way he said it. And the officer put her hand gently on his arm and said, "Would you like to sit in the squad car?" And the manager said, "Or maybe you would like to go to the restaurant. I'll buy you a bowl of soup and a sandwich. You're probably hungry." And the man said no. And after a bit, he jerked away. He jerked away. He jerked away. He ran this way 2 steps and that way 2 steps, and then he dashed across the street right in front of a car. And he ended up in the field. And he was thrashing around, kicking the weeds and slamming the top of the weeds tops with his hands and brushing things aside and looking. And meanwhile, the deputy sheriff and a couple store employees and 3 or 4 other people, and someone walked over from the gas station, and a little girl leading a dog on a leash came over, and they were all watching him, kicking and cursing and slamming the tops of the grasses in the field. And then he found it. There it was, the bag, the duffel bag. "Ha!" he said. "Ha! That proves it. That proves it. That in that bag," he said. But he didn't say any more because he himself was shocked. The bag moved. The bag tussled. It moaned. Something in it. It was as if the bag was going to give birth. The man knew what was in the bag, or he thought he knew. He thought it was the boy, the dead boy that he hadn't killed, that he had found near the ocean. But now it was wiggling and kicking and moaning. It was the greatest thing that he'd ever seen. His mind totally went to a holy place. He thought, this is it. This is the conception that I needed. This, I will paint this. I will paint this. And he grabbed the bag off the ground, the wiggling bag, the moaning bag, and flipped it over his shoulder. He smiled that great smile that everyone said, "Oh, I'm all right. I'm all right. I just needed this moment. I needed this inspiration. I will rush up the hill into the woods to the little shack, and I will paint. I will paint this bag, and you will see. You will understand. The world will know. The world will know." And he started sobbing and walking. The deputy sheriff stepped back. They had been through this before. If he sort of gathered himself and would go home, they would leave him alone. Maybe he didn't need to eat. No one wanted to put him in jail. There was a huge rigmarole that put him in jail because the judge would just say, "Get him back on his lithium, get him home. We don't need him in jail. He has a mental illness. He thinks he's a genius." Maybe he is, but he acts weird a lot of the time. So they stepped back. This time when he crossed the road, he looked both ways. He seemed all right. And he walked on the other side. He went into the overpass to the freeway. He went up the hill. He left the road. He left the eyes of the others. By then, the bag had calmed down. It was wiggling a little. He could tell that what was inside was alive, but he didn't want to let it out. He wanted to paint it. He wanted to paint it. He wanted to show. He wanted to feel himself and his muse, himself and the angels, himself and his inner self. He wanted to feel that all fused together and make this masterpiece, make this great painting. So he got to the path. It was the shortest way to his shack, and it was a shack. And he labored. It was quite uphill, this part. And he labored and labored. And by then, was it the boy? Whatever was in that bag, he was sure it was a boy and that he hadn't killed him, but it had gone limp. It wasn't moving. It wasn't wiggling, he didn't think. It didn't seem to be doing anything, and he was worried that he would be too late. It was the bag moving that was going to be the great inspiration. He worked his last way on the path that wound, and it came up on a flat area, and there was his shack. He rushed inside. He spun the canvas towards the window where the light was. He didn't know where to put it. He got it off his shoulder, but he didn't know where to put it. Should he put it on the floor? Should he put it on the weather-beaten couch? Should he put it up high on the counter? He didn't. Finally, he felt it moving. It was almost like he was going to have to wrestle with it. So he got it down off and he got it onto the couch. And it was wiggling and wiggling. And he rushed over and he got his paints. He got his brush. He dipped it in. The bag was moaning and wiggling. And he started painting. Oh, and it was. Oh, the moment of truth had arrived. He wept with joy, tears rolling down his face. He was painting like he had never painted before. He was mixing black with red in such a way that it made a splendid color that couldn't be described. Yes, the bag was there, and you could tell it was a bag, a duffel bag, a long bag, maybe a bag even big enough to stick a boy in, a boy that he hadn't killed. When he finished the painting, it was dark outside. By then he had turned a light on, and he was exhausted. The bag wasn't any longer moving. It was there on the couch, but it had been moving, you could tell, because some part of the bag, the end of the bag, maybe the heaviest part, maybe even the head of someone, was off the couch. And the rest of the bag was on the couch. The man, the painter, the genius, the failure, the crazy person went over and put his fingers on the bag and waited and waited.